Time to talk about the national news. And what we can do, well, I think it's important to know that when something happens, you really have to look into what happened to decide what you can do about it. It's a lot of people knee-jerk. They hear about something and they immediately have a solution. And so what I started doing is I started going through and researching about what happened, what information did people let out about the Florida shooting, and what can we learn from it, what worked, what didn't work, why it happened, and whether or not there were things in place that could have prevented it from happening. So let's start by asking some questions. These are the kinds of questions that I asked. And I said, how was a killer, how was a shooter able to get around school security? Well, the first thing that they told us was that that high school had fences and gates. And during the day, those gates were locked. But what you're going to hear later is that some of the students escaped by jumping over the fences. So they couldn't have been that high. But what they're saying, too, is that their gates were open around campus so students and school buses could get in and out easily. So they opened the gates when school started in the morning, and they opened the gates when school ended. And this particular individual was a student there, so he knew exactly when the gates would be open. And what he ended up doing was he went up, saw the gates, went in, and then when he realized that the school would go into lockdown, he also knew that if he set the fire alarm, it would dismantle the safety system. So he had a lot of knowledge, pre-knowledge about what was going on. And the school resource officer, you know, they say he may or may not have been on the campus. They don't know where he was. So he probably wasn't there. And once a person gets on the campus, they're free to roam around in any building unchecked because it's all unlocked. So it was fairly easy for him to get onto the campus. Well, we also know that, like I said, once that happens, they go into a procedure called Code Red. I don't know why it kept coming up blue. And they said doors lock automatically. Now, I'm not sure. I can't really believe that all of the doors lock automatically. Probably the building doors lock automatically. And the students and the staff are required to stay in their classrooms. Now, that's well and good, providing that they are protected while they're in their classrooms. And when crews pulled a fire alarm, it overrode the Code Red. And where some people were saying they thought that he was looking for the students to go out in the hallway to shoot them, you're going to find out he really didn't. He shot them in the classroom. And then he shot them in several classrooms, and he shot through doors. So it's an interesting thing to start dissecting and saying what really happened. So CNN published the timeline. And when we start talking about the timeline, we can really get an understanding of what's possible to do and what's not possible to do. Turns out that on Valentine's Day at 2:19 p.m., a Uber driver deposits crews at the school. And I find it very interesting the way they write things. You know, it says, a witness spots crews arriving and alerts a colleague by radio. Now, how many parents have a school radio? Right? So this has to be an employee, someone that has access to their system. And then within a minute, he hears gunshots and then reports a Code Red situation or an active shooter. So we know that at 2:20, the shooting starts. At 2:21, the crews enters the school's east stairwell with a rifle inside a soft case, black soft case. When he exits the stairwell, he puts the rifle out of the case. It's a little conflicting. I don't know how he shot anybody with the gun still in the case, but it's only 2:21. He pulls the school's fire alarm, prompting the evacuation of 300 students. In that school, when you pull the fire alarm, the whole school evacuates. Now, this is over a 30-acre campus with many buildings and many buildings have multiple floors. And if you pull that fire alarm, everybody in the school evacuates. So it creates a lot of people going a lot of places. You can see where that helps him as well. So the suspect begins shooting into 4 classrooms. And then he takes another stairwell to the 2nd floor and shoots another victim. He used a .223 caliber AR-15. And according to another article, he shot 150 rounds of ammunition, which meant he reloaded at least 5 times. He changed clips at least 5 times. He allegedly was wearing a gas mask and carrying smoke grenades, but there was no report that he actually used them. As the school goes into lockdown, the students take cover inside the classroom. Others jump over the fences. So these fences can't be very high. And escape to take shelter at a nearby Walmart. Some students text, and others are on social media providing images of chairs overturned in classrooms and floors stained with blood. 12 people were killed inside the building, 2 outside, and 1 on the street. 2 others die at the hospital. Okay? At 2:27, the gunman takes the building's east stairwell to the 3rd floor, where he drops the gun and backpack and runs down the stairs. That says that the whole thing took place in 7 minutes. Okay? So if we're going to do something to prevent something like this, it has to be able to occur very, very fast. All right? 2:28, the suspect exits building 12, runs toward the tennis courts. He eventually merges in with the students that are evacuating, and that's how he got off the campus. 2:50, he arrives at a nearby Walmart, buys a drink and a Subway, and walks out. And the sheriff's office begins to investigate the active reports. When the deputies arrive, hundreds are students of fleeing, which means they arrived 30 minutes after it started. By the time they arrived, he was gone. Okay, so when you see those hundreds of deputies and a place filled full of sheriff's cars, well, that's nice, they're there, but they're not doing anything. It's already over. At 3:01, the suspect goes to McDonald's, sits down for a short time, and he walks out also. At 3:11, the FBI and dozens of other police vehicles respond to the shooting. That's 41 minutes after the shooting started. They're not very effective in doing this. Video shows some students lying on the ground being treated. At 3:15, the gunman's still at large. At 3:40, the school begins dismissing students, buses them to a hotel where they can reunite with their relatives. A witness who had seen Cruz arriving identifies him. Let me see. At 3:50, at 3:53, law enforcement searches the school buildings to evacuate students from the classroom. There's nothing happening. It's over. I mean, it's just way over. And then at 4:20, the school superintendent says the school received no warnings and was not aware of any threats to the school. He's lying. And we'll show you that he's lying. At the end of the day, the police has the gunman, and right now he's being charged with murder. But you can see that if you want to protect your children, it has to happen very, very quickly. It has to happen right at the beginning. What else do we know about Nicholas Cruz? And this comes from an article where the school system is laying out some information. And they say, as a middle school student, Nicholas Cruz regularly got into trouble insulting people, disobeying teachers, and disrupting classes. Problems escalated at high school, and disciplinary records obtained by the, and then the article went blank. They never said what his disciplinary records were at the high school. One of the things that troubles me about this a lot is, and this may sound unrelated, last week I was at a committee group that was talking about the ability to reduce suicides. And we were at College of the Canyons. And College of the Canyons said, you know, we have an active program to reduce arrests, reduce student arrests. And boy, that triggered something. And so when I looked at this, and I started researching this, I started seeing that all over the country. That is a new thing. We're going to reduce student arrests. So keep that in mind when we start talking about what they knew and whether or not, when you do that, when you reduce student arrests, he doesn't get a record. Okay, and then when they finally had enough of him and they decide we're going to have him leave school, they just throw him out on the street. I guess they thought it was someone else's problem, but it came back to roost. So what else do we know? We know that the FBI call center was alerted about this guy. It was actually the second time they were alerted. I found out later in some more articles that the first time the FBI was alerted about him, and he was sent some Facebook messages, and they said they couldn't find him. It was just impossible to find him. We find out that his Facebook name was Nicholas Cruz. I mean, is this not the height of incompetence? And so the FBI call center was alerted, and they didn't do anything, and they didn't notify the local office. So here you go, another time when we missed an opportunity.
Alan?
Yes.
They said that across the country there was only 12 or 13 Nicholas Cruzes that spelled his name with a K.
Okay.
And they could have investigated 13 people.
Sure. Sure.
And he had 39 times the police went to his residence that his mother called because he was being a problem.
We'll talk about that too. Because they said recently it was 20 calls, but over a period of several years it was 30 calls. And the sheriff's department didn't do anything about it. So we keep hearing that these perpetrators slip through the cracks. I think the crack is very big. And so who should we blame? Should we blame the gun? Should we blame the school? Should we blame law enforcement? Should we blame our elected officials? Or the guy himself? Who should we blame? So let's go it backwards. Let's do it backwards. Let's talk about Nicholas. Cruz these are quotes out of several articles that I found from fellow students. Cruz talked about shooting lizards, squirrels, and frogs, said Trevor Hart, who knew him from Spanish class and said he seemed a little off. Police were called to his house numerous times, said a former neighbor, and he was seen shooting at neighbors' chickens. Now, you know, chickens aren't people, but aren't there laws in Florida about discharging a weapon off your property? And they didn't do anything? You know, here, do you remember last year with the situation with Steve Petzold and Elaine Ballas? And Steve made that video where he shot a pellet gun at a target and put a little white powder in it so it looked like it had a, and he had the FBI out interviewing him. But in this particular case, this guy falls right through. A teacher at the middle school told the Miami Herald that Cruz had been identified previously as a potential threat to classmates. So how's that superintendent saying, oh, we never heard anything about this guy? I mean, it's just, nothing happened. And Jim, Jim, who teaches math, said, we were told last year that he wasn't allowed on campus with a backpack on him. There were problems with him last year, threatening students, and I guess he was asked to leave campus. Well, gee, that's really great. Here's another quote from an individual who lived next door. He wasn't surprised when the gunman was named as Cruz, and he remembered him as a troubled and violent loner who used to steal from neighbors and throw coconuts at their homes. Well, if you're stealing from neighbors, why didn't the sheriff's department take care of him? Why didn't they arrest him? Why wasn't he charged with anything? His most prominent memory of the shooter was when he smashed the security glass of a classroom door in a violent rage before he was expelled from school. So why didn't the school send him, call the sheriffs? But maybe it's because they want to reduce the arrests coming out of their school. So today, he's charged with 17 counts of first-degree murder. He wants to plead guilty to avoid the death penalty. And there's no question that this evil individual is responsible 100% for these horrific acts of violence. I mean, he's going to, we'll see what happens, whether they accept his guilty plea or not. But this guy is either going to spend his life in jail or they're going to put him to death. So let's talk about elected officials. And this, again, goes back to the discussion that I was having at the committee on reducing suicides. They were saying, you know what if you know somebody has a problem? We need laws to protect us. Here are people that are talking, that are supposed to be experts in this field, and they don't know what laws are already on the books here in California. So the question is, did the Florida legislature provide schools and local law enforcement with the tools necessary to take action against individuals who they thought were a threat to themselves or to others? And in another one of the articles I read, the answer is no. They did not. But here in California, it's a little bit different. There's two laws on the books that can help you in some form of situation like that. One is called the Gun Violence Restraining Order Law. In that case, if you are a family member, a son, daughter, spouse, you can indicate to law enforcement that you believe that your relative is a threat to himself or others, and they will require him to temporarily give up his firearms, if he has any, and go through some mental health screening. And right now, Oak Tree is talking about providing a service for people so that they could give that up for those 21 days, and then what would happen after that would happen after that. The other one is the 5150 mental health evaluation capability. Now Scott's here; he knows his mother, right? I asked my wife. She's an RN at Kaiser. She works in urgent care, and I said, do you ever have anybody come in and put them through this 5150 process? And she says, yeah, I had, the other day I had an elderly gentleman come in, and he said he was extremely distraught, and he was, very discouraged, and his life was not going the way he wanted to, and she asked him, she said, are you thinking of killing yourself? And he said, well, yes, I am. I'm really thinking of committing suicide. So right then you wheel him over to ER and say, here's a 5150 candidate. And they get a mental health evaluation from a psychiatrist at the hospital. And if they find that that person is a threat to themselves or others, they call the sheriff's department, and that person gets put on a minimum of 3-day watch and hold. And also, it gives them the ability to go into the house and remove weapons that they have. So we do here in California have the ability to go, and don't get any ideas, we really have the ability to go and take care of situations where people believe that they have a relative or even a person, anybody. You have a neighbor that goes out in front of your house and is shooting up whatever, or you can call the sheriffs and they'll come out to look for this 5150 thing. And so there are two laws in California that allow us and give us some leeway in that way. Then comes the FBI. Now, how many people have called a call center? You guys do that regularly? I mean, everybody seems now to want to have rather than taking calls locally, they want a call center because they think it's cheaper. But it's typically not as efficient, and things typically get slip away, and you're playing the telephone game because you're telling the call center something and someone tells someone something else, and it goes on. Well, in this case, they had a tip, And they didn't take any action, and they didn't notify the local office. And I think that's a serious breakdown of discipline within the FBI. So is that a rare occasion? Turns out it isn't. Turns out there's 6 of them right there, which includes Nicholas in the upper right-hand corner. And the New Mexico shooter next to him was interviewed by the FBI and let go. The Florida shooter, nightclub shooter, was interviewed twice by the FBI and let go. The Boston bomber was interviewed by the FBI, and the Russians called and said, you know, this guy's a problem, and they ignored it. The Charleston shooter was allowed to purchase his gun because he had errors in the because of errors by the FBI agents in inputting to his records, so he passed the background check. And the Fort Hood shooter was known to the FBI to be dangerous, and they failed to notify the Army. So this is definitely, without a doubt, something that we really need to hold the FBI accountable for. We need to call those individuals that are responsible for this and say, you know what, the inaction in the FBI and the people slipping through is just happening in too often of a situation, and they really need to get their act together. So the local sheriff, did anybody watch that interview with Captain Israel? I mean, this guy was making excuses of why that they let him go. They didn't take any action, and he said, because he broke no laws. Well, stealing is not against the law in Florida. Shooting and letting off of your property is not against the law? I guess not. So they did nothing. The schools. The knowledge of Nicholas Cruz's history and problems, what did they report to law enforcement? And the idea is probably nothing. This arrest reduction program, where the schools now are making a decision as to how they're going to handle problem youth, and they're going to handle it by having their counselors counsel them, is and having this coming across the country tells me that the schools must be going through some kind of process where they're looking at their data. And they don't want to be the school with the most arrests, right? So we'll reduce it. It's kind of like when a city wants to be the safest city, they stop taking reports. And the fire alarm system, the security system with the gates wide open, what good is that? I mean, you turn around, you open the gates up, you let everybody in and out. You don't know who's coming or going. It doesn't seem like a smart move. And the fire alarm system, complete evacuation without concern of where the fire report came from. So I mean, I could see, like, if it was in the building that they were in, if it was in that building and they evacuated that building, but do they evacuate the other side of the campus? Or do they put everybody out in the street together so that they have a lot of people outside? I think is absolutely absurd. And one absent resource officer for over 30 acres. Now, I found an article in here where a resource officer, where a kid went to go shoot up a school in Colorado, and he met up with the resource officer, and so only one person died that day, and that was the shooter. And I read another one where the resource officer interviewed a kid that brought a gun and a knife onto school premises, and obviously he went away in chrome bracelets. But in those situations, I don't see how you can expect one person, I don't care how good they are, to be somewhere on a 30-acre farm, and something happens somewhere on it, and they're going to be there instantly to go within those 7 minutes. So what I think is amazing is that those two heroes we talked about were able to get to the shooter within those 7 minutes. It cost them their lives, but they came across, it was reported, people saw them motoring across the field on in a golf cart, and they found him. I don't know how that worked, but so, and they have no way to determine the threat location. So now let's talk about the gun. It's an AR-15. It's a semi-automatic, clip-fed weapon. It's scary looking because it looks like that Armalite 15 looks like an assault rifle, which would shoot bursts or fully automatic, but it does not. It's a semi-automatic weapon. And he shot 150 rounds. So in 7 minutes, he loaded a minimum of 5 clips. If he had 30 round clips, he reloaded 5 times. If he had 10 round clips, he reloaded 15 times. But he got off 150 rounds in 7 minutes. It was purchased legally about a year ago. And when he was purchased, he went through background check and he passed. Well, how'd that happen? Obviously, the schools and law enforcement didn't put anything on his record that would make him fail. Now, whose fault is that? I mean, that's got to be law enforcement. And, of course, a semi-automatic weapon requires the trigger to be pulled. But I think that if law enforcement and schools would have inputted the information so he would have passed the background check, he wouldn't have had the gun in the first place. And that's what I hear a lot of people say. They don't want the gun in the hands of people that shouldn't have them. He shouldn't have had one. All right. So how can we protect our children in schools? Well, I'm probably going to lose half the audience right now when I'm going to say you can't rely on some miracle occurring and guns are going to cease to exist. Because even if there was a desire of people to change the Second Amendment, it would take years. The process takes a long time. And even if by some miracle they said, well, there's not going to be any more guns tomorrow, it would take years to get them all. And I doubt whether they really could get them all because they don't know where they are. So I think we got to look at what we really can do locally here. And what we can do locally here is not change the Second Amendment. But I think we need to return to a policy. We need to talk to our schools and say, you need to go back to the policy of reporting illegal behavior by your students. And by the way, I'm already starting that conversation. So I'm going to meet with a Hart School Board member next week, and we're going to talk about that. What do they do, and how do they protect their students? And in some respects, I think we should be thankful for and support our local sheriff department because I know Captain Lewis. I like him. I have a lot of confidence in him. And I cannot believe that I would have watched Captain Lewis do what Captain Israel did and just make excuses. Something tells me if Captain Lewis found out that he was missing steps in the local sheriff's department, he would be absolutely adamant about making things happen and correcting things on the spot. But I think we've got to go over and above counting on law enforcement in the event of a threat because they're not going to get there in time. They're just not going to get there in time. You have to be able to do this in the first 7 minutes. And we need to talk about what we can do to have things happen immediately, not 10 or 15 minutes later. You've heard me say this before, but when seconds counts, the police are minutes away. So that's what I think we need to truly look at, what we can do over and above what law enforcement does. So I say we need to be prepared. We need to make school access more restrictive. I mean, you can't have fences people can hop over. Let's make fences that have a real and true barrier. There's been several of these shootings now where the shooter just gets on campus. I remember there was one where they just, there was you couldn't get in the building, so he just shot out a couple windows. So you really need to do that. And I don't think metal detectors at the entrance, at a high school, if you had 3 entrances and you had metal detectors, I mean, at the entrances, people say, well, we can't have metal detectors at every door. We can't have them at every classroom. You don't need them at every classroom. All you need them is where you go in and where you come out. And I got to tell you what, people will go through that thing lickety-split. Once they realize what triggers a metal detector, they won't bring it with them. That's all. I mean, you see people do this constantly in other places. Every individual entering the grounds, like you were talking about, needs to be identified. You need to know who that person is. I mean, I worked at JPL. JPL has thousands of employees. They know everybody that gets on their campus because we go by and scan a badge. Well, shouldn't badges be, you could issue badges to school guys. And if they don't scan the badge, they don't get in unless they talk to somebody. And that stuff, and you can't tell me it's going to prevent people from getting in and out, because I see people in companies do this all the time. And the one thing that just amazed me is you need to upgrade doors and hallway walls to prevent a perpetrator from shooting through them. A guy is inside the classroom, holding the door closed, and gets shot 5 times? Now, I have some personal experience with this, because at one point in time, in the mid-'80s, we had an active shooter situation where I worked. And when the perpetrator came in, he actually was looking for a particular individual. When Joe came walking out, he got up and he took some shots at Joe. And fortunately, he just shot him through the lower part of his ear. But the bullets went through 2 rooms. Drywall doesn't stop bullets, right? So why have the kids hunker down in classrooms if you're going to have walls and doors that you can shoot through, right? It makes, we talk about common sense? Makes common sense to me. Put security cameras in hallways, outside common areas, campus entrances, so security personnel can monitor and detect unauthorized access all around the campus. You know, this guy was moving. You heard it. He came in, he went through one floor, he moved up to another floor. How is security going to know what's going on? You know, it's really interesting, because active shooter situations in a lot of cases, and here I'll go back to the one that I experienced at work, when you're involved in it, you don't know what's going on. So here I was in the back of the 2nd floor of a building, and the shooting took place in the front on the 1st floor at the entrance, okay? And all of a sudden, I had 2 employees come running in the middle of this bay of cubicles and yells, "There's a shooter out in front, someone's shooting." Well, I come out of my office, and all of a sudden I have 30 people huddled around me, and they're very, very nervous. And they're saying, "Well, what do we do?" Well, I looked around. There was no place to go hide. There was no room big enough right there for 30 people. If I wanted to go to a conference room, I'd have to go down the hallway toward the shooting. I'm not going to do that. So in this particular case, I did the other thing. Because I didn't know this at the time, but now they say, run if you can, escape if you can, right? Hide if you can, and fight if you must. You've heard that before? Well, what I did was I looked at my watch and said, 10:30, time for lunch. And because down the stairs in the back of the building was the door leading out of the building, and it was right next to the gate to get to the parking lot. So I said, we're going out of the building. I want you guys out of the facility. Don't come back until after lunch. And my group leader took up the back. I led them down, and when he met me, because we had everybody out, I took him to lunch. And by the time I took him to lunch and was leaving the parking lot, it was over. It was over. So, but while you're in that situation, you have no idea what's happening. You're going to make a decision, and it may be a good decision, it may be a bad decision. Fortunately for me, it was a good decision. And later on, I got questioned by the security guys, and the security guys said, "Why did you do that? You should have just stayed there, because if you went down those stairs, you might have run into the shooter." I said, "If I had stayed there, the shooter might have run into me." So it's a game. It's a battle. You're going to play the odds. You're going to do what you think is best. So anyway, but if there's security cameras in those areas and they know where the shooter is, then they can also, in some cases, talk to their security staff or their first responders and tell them where to look. Why have them go all through 30 acres of buildings when the guy left 20 minutes ago? So I believe each school should have 2 or 3 trained, certified, and armed security guards. So they have a command post with cameras that shows those common areas and those outside areas, so they can determine where the threat is, and then using their radios, they can have the in-house security and first responders to be sent directly to the threat, or maybe up both sides, and then if first responders get there in time, well, they can send them directly to where the threat is rather than have them going helter-skelter everywhere. And I think that's probably a more effective way to get things done. We were just talking about, Mr. Smith was talking about teachers. And I don't think that all teachers are going to be the right candidates for this. But I think if you enlist teachers who are willing to take an additional responsibility protecting your students, that's probably a good thing. There's another sheriff in Florida who's instituted that kind of a program. And what he does is for those teachers that are willing to take on that responsibility, they go through a training exercise similar to a reserve sheriff. And in some cases, this sheriff says in addition to a reserve sheriff, because they want to work in this particular situation. And I think they should be trained, certified, compensated, give them an incentive, and providing the material and resources to assist campus security. And that might be a gun, it might be a taser, it might be a gun and a radio, it might be a taser and a radio. It might be something that tells them what to do and how to confront the perpetrator. Because teachers may be the only help determining the safety of our children in the first minutes of the attack, because they might be the only ones close enough to do any good. I mean, you can have 100 cops show up, but when they show up 20 minutes late, it doesn't do much good. I think it's also important to stop portraying our school as weak, no gun zone targets. I wrote an article for the Gazette. It'll come out tomorrow, and it's on this same subject. It's not quite as comprehensive as this presentation because I had another 2 days to research. And but what I did say is think about why a person picks a school as a target. I mean, why don't they pick a police station? That sounds silly to you? Well, it's a hard target. They know that if they go and they attack a police station, they're going to be met with a lot of resistance. Okay, armed resistance. But when you start calling schools no-gun zones and saying there's not going to be any guns there, right, who's going to not have the guns? The victims. And they know it's an easy target. So I think we need to show our resolve to protect our students, because perception is reality. If people perceive that these targets are hardened targets, that they aren't going to be able to just walk in and kill anybody they want to, they probably will think twice about doing it. And make your perception known. It has to be a willingness to protect the students and staff, and the readiness to protect the students and staff, and the information to students and staff. And a lot of schools have been posting, or people have been posting pictures on the internet of saying this school is teachers are armed or whatever. And so it's our children and it's our grandchildren. And no matter what your stance on gun control is, it's time to take action at a local level. Yeah, they'll let those other guys do what they're going to do at the federal level, because immediately something happens, and those individuals that say we need to have background checks. Well, wait a minute, we had a background check. We need more laws. Well, what should they do? What should they say? But we need to speak out. We need to speak out to get our local schools, law enforcement, all on the same page, so that we don't have that same situation where someone that's a troublemaker, someone that's caused a lot of problems, someone that has violated the law, can't go into a gun store and pass a background check. So I think we need to speak out. We can speak out in the Signal. We can speak out in the Gazette. We can speak out at local school board meetings. We can demand that local security put in place. And like I said, I'm going to be talking to some of the Hart District people, and I'll find out exactly what they have. And then you can write your state and federal representatives. I mean, who does the FBI work for? Works for the president, right? So I don't care what you think about the president. You tell him, hey, the FBI is not doing their job. Why are they allowing that to happen? Go kick some butt. Let's go make them do what they're supposed to do. And let's plug the cracks in the federal and state enforcement. So I don't know. I'm tired of listening to vague proposals of, hey, we're going to do this or we're going to do that, or let's do this or that. And then it does little or nothing to solve the problem. I don't want to see my grandkids come home in a body bag. I don't want to see anybody's grandkids come home in a body bag. But we need to do something to solve the problem that we have under our control, that we have the ability to do. And if we concentrate on that first, then maybe that will help the problem go away. Before I ask you what you think, I just remember when, Mr. Smith was also talking about, he says, why do you think this is happening today? And whenever anybody says that, it makes me remember when in the late 60s, my company had a plant in Duluth, Minnesota, where you couldn't fly directly to Duluth, Minnesota. You had to fly to Minneapolis, St. Paul. And then you get on North Central Airlines that had a fleet of DC-9s, and you would go to Duluth. And if it was hunting season, all the hunters would come on board with their rifles and put them in the overhead. And none of us thought a thing about it. And when I went into the plant, guys would have would have their hunting rifle in the corner of their office because they were going hunting in the afternoon or something. Nobody thought that anybody was going to shoot anybody with it. So there is a difference in society today as it was before. And I don't know if we'll ever get back to the way it was, but that brought that to mind. You have any questions? You got any comments? Yes, sir.
A lot of those violent video games that the kids are playing.
Did you hear me, Alan?
Yeah.
Have you ever watched these video games that the kids are playing?
No.
Well, they're always shooting at one another. They're games.
Well, certainly if you if you compare, I kind of joke about this, if you compare the attitude of the people in the movies today to Gunsmoke, there certainly is a different attitude about when you shoot somebody and when you don't, and what firearms you have. So yes, there's definitely a difference in the media, and I have to wonder, does the media mimic the society, or does the society mimic the media? I don't know. What do you think?
Well, the violent movies that you see, if you ever look at some of your kids playing some of these video games are on steroids for the movies. They're that bad. I'm sitting here, my daughter's playing a game, and I says, that guy's running across between the buildings with an AK-47 behind him, because I know what it looks like, because I was in the military. And I'm looking at the game, and it's just, they're shooting each other all the time.
Well, yeah, I mean, I tell you what.
They think this kid gets out there, and to him he's elevating his game. That's
true. And you know something else, I think it's interesting because Scott is going to laugh here in a minute. Because when he was growing up, he would say, I'm going to school to play, and we'd say, see ya, come back at dark, right? And he'd go and play and come back. And someone said to me on Facebook, they were talking about guns at home. And I said, I never worried about a gun at home with my kids because I taught them what guns were, right? I taught them what guns were. I let them shoot guns. I taught them they were not a toy, and I made them realize that if you shoot something, it dies. So in many cases now, people are so risk averse with their children, they don't teach them that. They think that if you begin to think that what you see on television or what you do in a video game is reality, yeah, I can understand that, because I don't think that you'd ever think that. Yeah, I don't know what's going to solve that issue. That issue is only going to be solved when the community, when the individuals that live in the country say, I'm not going to let my kids have those violent games. I'm not going to go see the movies where I never liked the slasher movies or any of those kind anyway, but some people loved them. And yeah, I don't know. Like I said, does society mimic the films, or the films mimic society? Anybody else? Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am. Yes, somebody.
Well, I agree with the gentleman about the games, because I used to visit a home with these young kids that were pre-high school or middle school, and they'd get their door closed, and if you opened it up, that's what they were watching, those games. And in fact, the games included smashing women across their face onto the ground, no respect for the women, and then they want to live this. And when the one reached high school, he wanted to be in lacrosse so he could hit people with a stick. And so then he finishes high school, and he enters the Marines. And I have a big concern about this, and because he wants to shoot somebody. And so I thought, should I call the Marines? And I hate to, create a problem with them. And I have to confess that I weakened out and didn't call the Marines. But what happened? The Marines must test them. Because first he became a helicopter mechanic, and next he's a embassy guard in Dublin, Ireland.
Okay.
No front line stuff.
Well, I saw the who else saw the Facebook post of the teacher shooting a water pistol at the going pow pow pow, right? Yeah. I mean, is that really representative of the kind of an individual that we want teaching our kids? I thought that schools. Her rights, huh?
Yeah.
Well,
see, that's the whole
problem. I don't know about her rights, but I don't know. I thought schools were supposed to teach you how to think, how to analyze, how to open your mind, and then let you make a decision. But it seems that they're not doing that right now. And so hopefully, if you're a parent and you have children in school, you're doing it for them. You're helping them gain that kind of information. And my son here always used to kid me about overanalyzing things. I was always analyzing stuff. And if an issue happened, then I would want to know why. And so that's why I took all the time to go through this, read as many articles as I could find. And when I realized that you only have 7 minutes or 5 minutes to take care of business, it puts a whole different perspective on what's going on. And when I realized that we had this guy dead to rights, we had this guy so that he should never have passed a background check, and he did. So then I read stuff about, like they say, well, you can buy guns over the internet. And then the ATF guys tried to buy guns over the internet and couldn't get one, because every one that they went to go buy had to go to a dealer to pick it up, and then they had to go through the background check.
But you can buy them out of the trunk of a car over here.
Well,
shopping.
that's a law enforcement problem, right?
Right.
And that's a law enforcement problem. And when they talk about guns and they talk about understanding where they are, there's all the ghost guns that are out, the ones that are put together. And I saw a thing on on Facebook where someone posted a homemade automatic shotgun. So saying guns are going to go away is probably not realistic and not something we as a community could do. But protecting our kids, making sure that when they're in school, everything that's possible to be done to protect them is done, is something we can do, because that's all under our local control, and it's up to us to go make it happen. Yes?
I have contact with 3 school districts up here, Sulphur Springs, Saugus, and Hart. And I think when you chat with whoever you're going to chat with, you will find Hart has an absolutely excellent system in place. And the principals, at least the principal at my school, sent an absolutely fantastic email out to all the parents this week, outlining everything in wake of what you talked about today on how they handle what all you were talking about.
Excellent.
In the Sulphur Springs School District, when I go to read for Dr. Seuss, all the doors are closed and locked. You have to go and knock in order to get into a classroom. At the Saga School, the one where the shooter lived above it and shot down, that couldn't, he didn't have to get in any place. He shot from his backyard. They have high fences in front now, and you cannot get in unless you go through the office. There's big gates, and it says, sorry. And I've been through many drills at the Saga School in kindergarten, and the teachers immediately lock all the doors instantly when the all-call comes on, and we all know where to go. We sit down where we can't be seen by the window in the dark, and they're quiet as little mice throughout the whole, and it is a long time that they need to sit there and be totally quiet. And the principal and somebody else comes around and checks every door to make sure that the teacher has, taken the responsibility that they have. And they have a nice little booklet about what to do, when to do it, and all this good kind of stuff. So out here in the Santa Clarita Valley, they are aware of it, and they are doing, as much as they can, a good job. What the things that you're all talking about is all going to cost a heck of a lot of money. School districts don't have that money. So that's one of the basic problems with almost all of your suggestions, and where are they going to get the money from?
Okay.
Okay?
Well, I'd love to find out that they're doing a whole bunch, and that we'd be happy with it. But you will have to find out. Maybe I'll get someone here to talk about it. Did you want to say something, Mr. Oh, I thought, Rick, you were ready to jump in. Oh, okay. All right. Well, I hope this was this presentation was a little enlightening, especially from the timeline aspect, so that you understood exactly what happened and you understood why some things will work and some things won't. Gives you a better idea. To make better suggestions, and we'll see what we can do. I kind of I had planned to do some other things, but the schedule had changed. There was questions to Mr. Smith about homelessness, and I was going to talk about, and we'll do this in the future, was Southern California Edison's time of use rollout, and how we have many seniors that are within just an instant of being homeless, and you start raising their bills by 30-40%, and they won't be able to afford to stay in their apartment, or not run their air conditioner when it's extremely hot, or give something else up. So we need to look into that situation as well. And again, and the other thing, and we'll talk about later, is there is a committee trying to discuss how we can minimize the number of suicides in Santa Clarita. And so here again, in a lot of cases, we need to discuss what's possible, what laws are there, how we can get the information to the people that need it, and hopefully we can in some way reduce that as well. And we'll be talking about that in the future too.